This video is brought to you by the Logitech Lightspeed Wireless range of keyboards, mice and headsets, the benchmark in wireless gaming performance.
Slated to launch alongside the PlayStation 5, Destruction AllStars is finally available. Published by Sony Interactive Entertainment and developed by Lucid Games, this interesting arcade-style multiplayer game is focused on, well, destruction, driving, and, weirdly enough, platforming. To talk about this one, though, I am joined by my good friend and colleague, as always, Richard Ledbetter.
Hey John, so I'm really interested in seeing your results here because it's a bit of a legendary game, this, because obviously we've been hearing on the grapevine for years now that Lucid Games was going to be doing a game for PlayStation 5 that would launch in the launch period, and here it is. So it's actually quite fascinating to actually see final code after this kind of stealth build-up behind the scenes.
That's right. Yeah, we first heard about this game sort of quietly all the way back in 2018, so it's cool to see it finally arrive. And I think launching first on PlayStation Plus is probably a very smart move for a game like this, because fundamentally this is focused on sort of fast action, quick rounds. It's a very arcade-style game, so you're going to need that player base, and hopefully this will get it there. But I guess on the technical side, at its core, this does run on Unreal Engine 4. It's a great looking game though, very colorful, kind of a different look than usual per se. It brings out all the typical tricks though. Excellent per object motion blur, you got temporal upscaling, great materials quality, just a beautiful, very vibrant visual design, screen space reflections are everywhere, lots of geometry, etc. It's just a very nice looking game. I'm also really fond of the animation work they have going on with their perhaps slightly over-the-top character designs.
So yeah, built on Unreal Engine 4 then, a really interesting visual makeup here. Unreal Engine 4, it really is kind of like very challenging from a graphical perspective, even on the next-gen systems that we've seen so far. And this is kind of borne out in the resolution numbers that we're seeing here, right?
Yeah, that's right. So Unreal Engine 4 offers dynamic resolution scaling, and Destruction AllStars is definitely taking advantage of this. For the developers, it actually sort of works in terms of percentages. So from what we can tell, it seems like the minimum that it can drop to is about 60% of 4K, while the maximum is closer to 85% instead. So that would make the absolute minimum then about 1296p, based on the way Unreal Engine 4 works. But it's super variable, I found. It's constantly adjusting up or down depending on the scene. But after counting a bunch of different shots, it does seem to average out around 70 to 75%. So it's kind of in that 1600p range. So, but I think that this is an interesting one, as it kind of demonstrates how effective dynamic resolution scaling can be, because it's fundamentally a pretty clear looking game. I think like image quality is clean. You can see some pixel breakup, specifically with the mix of the temporal upscaling and the motion blur together when things sort of break up a little bit, specifically at moments when the performance dips, as we'll talk about shortly. But otherwise, I mean, it looks pretty good, don't you think?
Yeah, I think it looks fantastic. I really enjoyed my short session with the game. I think when we talk about resolutions and percentages of 4K, we need to talk about the fact that it's actually on the X and the Y axis. Yeah, and also the temporal upscaling. I'm guessing it's going all the way up to 4K on that, but you know, I guess our counts kind of bypass that particular upscale.
Yeah, that's the kind of thing. Is it tries to give you the impression of a 4K image, but if you actually look at pixels, specifically on things like camera cuts, then you can see the raw pixel counts are actually below that.
Yeah,
but still, it's pretty typical, I think, of what we're going to see this generation. Dynamic resolution scaling is just sort of one of those tools that makes a lot of sense. It's really a very smart way to keep your performance up, because those drops just aren't going to be noticeable in comparison to actual slowdown.
Yeah, I mean, that's the thing, isn't it? Because when we do these pixel counts, we almost have to game the system, cheat the system, in order to actually see visible edges that we can count. So it's, again, you know, not really representative of the actual experience, where I'd say, as you said earlier, that the image quality is actually really clean.
Yeah, exactly. And that's why coming into this generation, it's really different from last time. I mean, with PS4 and Xbox One, that was still the era of FXAA. TAA was barely a thing. There were some attempts at it on even prior generation consoles, but it was generally rather poor with a lot of visible artifacts. So this is the first time we're seeing consoles launch with all the new modern techniques for producing a clean image. The mix of dynamic resolution scaling, temporal upsampling, all this stuff working together to sort of reduce pixel count in a smart way while still producing a clean image.
Right.
It's true with Destruction All-Stars, it was true with the Medium last week, and it's true with many of the launch games as well. But beyond the that kind of stuff, I think the surrounding package is also rather nice. It has a really clean, simple menu system, super fast loading. You sort of jump between everything just almost instantaneous, and I think this is really critical in giving it that arcade game-like feel. You know what I mean?
Yep, definitely.
And obviously, along those same lines, what's super critical to delivering an arcade-like experience is the frame rate. And Destruction All-Stars is a 60 frames per second game. It kind of had to be, I think, really, for what they're trying to do here and the speed of everything.
Yeah, I'm getting sort of shades of Rocket League from it in some respects as well. It really needs that kind of super crisp input, fast response to really deliver the best experience. I think by and large they've done a really good job here.
Yeah, so we're looking at some regular gameplay here, and the whole thing is that, you're often trying to target cars as they come in from a distance, or even the individual players when they're on foot, which is kind of the unique conceit with this game. So you're often coming up on very small targets from a distance at a high speed, and then you need to react very quickly to it. So hitting that higher frame rate is really key, I think, to make the game playable. The only real disappointment there is I actually would have liked to have seen 120 hertz support, as I really think a game like this could benefit from it, but I assume that was obviously not a target they were aiming for early on, and being this early in launch, I can see how that wouldn't have been possible. Certainly not the resolution we're seeing. So, but unfortunately, it's not 100% perfect, and as usual, when testing frame rate, it's all about finding those worst case scenarios, and I think I found that worst case scenario, and it's called gridfall. So essentially the idea here is that you are battling your opponents on a large floating platform suspended above, death. You have finite lives here, and as you play, the arena slowly breaks away. But when you first begin the match, and it's sort of a full field all meeting in the middle, so to speak, that's when I noticed the most significant drops. Here it could go into the 40s and even the lower 40s at points, though that really only lasts during this initial section. And then as the match actually progresses and the floor starts to fall away and people start losing lives, then it completely smooths out. But during that initial rush, you'll definitely run into some pretty significant slowdown.
Okay, that's not too bad. I guess it is a shame that it drops at all, but it does seem to be a specific mode and specific circumstances that cause it.
So yes, that's where the main issues are for sure, but there is another mode as well that does exhibit some slowdown, and that is called Carnado. In this, you're essentially depositing points in the center of the map directly into the Carnado itself. So when action begins to happen around the Carnado, which is made up of these sort of puffy smoke particles, and everybody begins to crash into one another and there's explosions going off, the frame rate here can also dip, again, into the upper 40s, lower 50s. It's not as severe as the other mode, but you'll definitely notice it. This does, however, highlight why we continue to bang the drum on VRR.
Right, yes, of course.
And I really hope Sony has this. I mean, they've said that they have this in the works. And it's definitely a key feature. And I hope that it's really going to be as plug and play as I would like, where, it's just an option you can enable. And in cases like this game would look completely smooth. You would not be able to detect any slowdown if it were using VRR. So I understand it's still relatively uncommon in the TV space, but I think going forward it's going to become more important. So we're going to keep mentioning it until it's implemented, because I think it would be awesome to have on the PlayStation 5.
Yeah, and I think, if anybody's sort of jumping into buying a 4K TV alongside their next generation consoles, I mean, if we look at the major brands like Samsung, LG, they do have VRR support, across the range. I think possibly the lower end screens might not, but even then, the mid-range and upwards, they do have VRR. So I do think it is the perfect time to have that support, and it really does kind of irk me that PlayStation 5 didn't launch with it. But at the same time, when I was talking to Microsoft about VRR support with LG, I kind of had, I don't know how to describe it, a peek behind the curtain. It's clearly something that did require a lot of R&D work. There was a relationship between LG and Microsoft to get a really good experience. I mean, we both accessed beta firmwares that showed distinct improvements. So it's not really just a case of flipping a switch. It is something that needs to be baked. It is something that needs to be honed into something that's really decent. But as we've seen on the Xbox, pays off massively, and about time we saw the same on PlayStation, I think.
And I guess while we're talking about hardware features, since this is a PS5 video, I would be remiss if we didn't discuss the DualSense, I suppose, and in fact the audio itself. So this game does make full use of the DualSense controller, kind of in a predictable way at this point, where the triggers sort of like change their intensity and their pull based on what's happening in the scene. So like when you're driving the car, obviously pulling the triggers, there's sort of that resistance there until it kind of clicks in to place for the gas and brake pedal. But whenever you take to the air, and if you actually listen, you can hear the controller kind of disengage the motor briefly. Same, I think, when you jump out of the car. So it's kind of like turning this resistance on and off as you play. And it actually works pretty well. And you can also hear things like your character's footsteps and some other things through the controller speaker. It's very subtle, but it does add a little bit to it. But what doesn't add to it...
I think I know where you're going here.
It's the microphone. So, okay, I get it. Having the microphone built into the controller... I mean, it makes sense on the surface, but I immediately found myself irritated with it when you just have people coming through the speaker, just saying nonsense, just being noisy. I mean, there's just guys that would like put on other music and just play it through the speaker, or just say random things. And, so I mean, immediately I'm just muting the controller, scrambling to get into the settings to turn the speaker down. Just all this stuff, and it's just I found it really distracting. And I know I'm not a big multiplayer guy normally, but it's just one of those things where I kind of feel like it could be useful if you're in a party chat, but as far as general play, I don't really like the idea of having this just active by default. Although I guess you obviously can disable this as you like.
Yeah, I get it. It is a bit weird, and I don't know. It should be kind of like friends on by default and everybody else off. Friends and teammates on. And
yeah, exactly. Something like that. That would make a lot of sense. So, I mean, it's cool tech. It's well done. I mean, it worked okay. It's just, it's just the nature of playing with random people that maybe it's not the best idea, at least for me. But really, I mean, that's kind of this game in a nutshell. And I guess if it seems like we have less to say than usual, it really comes down to the fact that it's a very small scale game. And that's not necessarily a bad thing. I mean, this really does feel like a super focused arcade style game. I kept thinking of Midway's The Grid somehow, where it's just like this like singular idea that's kind of spun into its own thing. And that's why I said earlier that this really makes a lot of sense to be on PlayStation Plus, because I feel like that's the way that you're going to get people into the game. Because as we saw with something like, say, Onrush, which I think we both enjoyed a lot, that was a full price game. It didn't hit the way it should have, and the community dropped off super fast, which kind of hurts the game experience. Whereas, so having something like this launch on a service like PS Plus, I think is just going to massively increase the number of people playing it. Kind of like, I guess, Rocket League, which was similar in that regard. Like, I don't think this is necessarily going to become the next Rocket League by any means, but you know, it might find some success as a result of that.
I mean, basically it gives it a massive audience from day one, which otherwise it might not have had. So in terms of giving the game a chance, you know, actually making it free on PlayStation Plus is, you know, an excellent move. So yeah, and I actually think it's a really interesting game. I had a lot of fun playing it, and I'm really interested to see where they go next with it.
Yeah, likewise. But seeing the aesthetic in this game with this sort of like the stadium environments and those curved sort of surfaces, I kept thinking about Trick Style and how I would love to see a proper Trick Style 2 done in this style. That would be nice, I have to admit. But that's probably, I think, all for this video for now. So if you appreciated this randomness, thanks for watching to the end, and thank you for being here, Richard.
Yeah, my pleasure, John.
If you enjoyed this video, as always, be sure to like, subscribe, ring the notification bell, all that good stuff. Find the original video over on Patreon if you want to see the game looking its best. And until next time, this is John and Rich signing off.
A breakthrough in design and engineering, the G915 features Lightspeed Pro-Grade Wireless, advanced LightSync RGB, and new high-performance, low-profile mechanical switches. Meticulously crafted from premium materials, the G15 is a sophisticated design of unparalleled beauty, strength and performance. Meet G15 Lightspeed and play the next dimension.